George McGinnis had a game that could translate to the modern era just as much as it did in the 70s. He was a great rebounder, a great perimeter defender, an advanced ball handler that loved to facilitate the offense, and a great jump shooter, even with his unorthodox one-handed follow-through, as he shot 35% from 3 in his best season. George was NBA ready before he committed to play at Indiana, where he had one of the best individual seasons in NCAA history. He then used a hardship clause to leave early for the ABA after the untimely death of his father. George would become a two-time champion with the Pacers before jumping to the NBA and forming a dangerous duo with Dr. J. But the Sixers couldn't get over the hump. George averaged 20 and 10 for 7 years in a row before an Achilles tear limited his effectiveness and had him out of the league at only 31 years old. Although George had a Hall of Fame career, he often flies under the radar in terms of the stars of the decade. But this video will pay homage to the late, great George McGinnis. Welcome to PZ Hoops, and let's get down to it. George was born on August 12, 1950 in Harpersville, Alabama, but he grew up in Indianapolis, where he played his high school ball at George Washington High, teaming up with future NBA big Steve Downing, as they were undefeated his senior season, winning the state title. George scored 148 points in the state tournament, which still stands as a state record. He was named Mr. Basketball for the state of Indiana and for the entire country in 1969. While also being named a first-team parade All-American. George and Steve both committed to the University of Indiana, joining another future NBA player in Joby Wright. Once he was eligible to play as a sophomore, George quickly established himself as one of the best players in the nation, as Indiana had the 10th ranked offense in the country, getting big wins over ranked opponents Kentucky, Notre Dame, and Michigan. George averaged 30 points, 15 rebounds, and 3 assists in his sophomore season, as he led the conference in field goals made, free throws attempted, rebounds, and points, becoming a third-team All-American. Despite George's dominance, Indiana's defense was one of the worst in the nation, so they finished 17-7, missing the tournament. Due to the recent court decision involving Spencer Haywood, the hardship clause was available, allowing underclassmen to skip their remaining eligibility to turn pro. George's dad had died 2 years earlier, after a fall off scaffolding during his work as a carpenter. He exercised the clause to leave Indiana after 1 season and signed with his hometown team, the Pacers. George was part of a rookie class that also saw the Pacers get Darnell Hillman, an extremely athletic forward from San Jose State. Indiana was 2 years removed from their first ABA championship, as they still had the same core of Mel Daniels, who was the reigning MVP, Roger Brown, Freddie Lewis, and Bob Niederlicky. George dropped 12 points and 10 rebounds in his ABA debut against Denver. About a month later, he dropped 29 points and 20 rebounds against the Colonels, along with 26 points and 25 rebounds 2 games later against Pittsburgh. He dropped 37 double-doubles this year, including 4 games with 20 rebounds. He averaged 17 points, 10 rebounds, and 2 assists as a rookie, finishing 3rd in Rookie of the Year voting behind Dr. J and Artis Gilmore. Indiana finished 47-37, matching up against Denver in the semifinals. George had a shaky playoff debut with 9 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 assists, shooting 4 for 17, but the Pacers won. He played the entire game 2, dropping 21, 15, and 8, but they lost by a point. His playing time was all over the place this series, as he only played about 26 minutes over the next 5, averaging a pedestrian 8 points, 8 rebounds, and 2.5 assists on 26% shooting, but Indiana was able to get past the Rockets in 7 games, facing the Stars next. He started the first 2 games of the series, dropping 31, 6, and 6 in Game 1, and 28, 20, and 7 in Game 2, but the Pacers lost both. They were able to tie the series, but George had shot 22% in Games 3 and 4. Indiana would drop Game 5, but they would win the next 2 to advance to the finals against the Nets, led by Rick Barry and Billy Paultz. George averaged a double-double for the series, including 30 and 20 in Game 3, but he fouled out 3 times. The Pacers were able to win Game 6 on the road behind 35 points from Roger Brown, as they won their 2nd title in 3 years. Indiana kept the same core in 1972, but they drafted a great point guard from Evansville in Don Buse, as they also signed former All-Star guard Donnie Freeman. After his excellent playoff run, George was a full-time starter at the 4, after Niederlicky was traded to Dallas in the offseason. McGinnis would hit the ground running, as he had a 2-week stretch in November where he scored 7 straight 30-point games. He would drop his career high on the 28th against the Chaparrals with 58 points, 16 rebounds, and 8 steals. George would drop 26 30-point games and 4 40-point games, as he cemented himself as one of the best players in the league, averaging 28 points, 12.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 2 steals, being named an All-Star and a second-team All-ABA member, finishing third in MVP voting behind Dr. J and Billy Cunningham. The Pacers had the fastest pace in the league and the third best offense, finishing 51-33, facing the Rockets again in the semifinals. The Pacers easily handled them in 5 games as George averaged 22 and 9. The Pacers faced Utah again in the division finals as Donnie and George both averaged 20, leading to the Pacers winning in 6, making the finals again, this time against the Colonels. This series would go to 7 games as George was dominant through the first 6, averaging 22 and 15. The Colonels picked the worst time to go cold as they shot 38% as a team and 63% from the line, as Indiana won their second straight title on the road. George would win the playoff MVP this year. Indiana brought Niedlicki back in 1973, but he would have a bench role this time. Since George was 4 years removed from high school, he was drafted by the Sixers in the second round. This would be George's best rebounding season by far, as he would have 12 games of over 20 rebounds, including an unreal game against Carolina on January 12th, when he dropped 52 points and 37 rebounds. George would average 26 points, 15 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 2 steals, making another All-Star game and making the first team All-ABA. Mel Daniels averaged his usual double-double, while Roger Brown, Bill Keller, and Don Buse all finished in the top 10 for three-point percentage. The Pacers finished 46 and 38, facing the Spurs in the semifinals. This series went all the way to 7 games, but the Pacers won despite shooting 35% as a team. The Stars were next, as this was another dogfight until Game 7, where the Pacers were blown out by 22, as George only scored 14 points on 3 of 12 shooting. Before the 1974 season, the Sixers were ready to send George's draft rights to the Knicks, but he decided to stay with Indiana, signing a 2-year contract with an $85,000 buyout clause. The Pacers shook things up this year as they traded Mel Daniels and Freddie Lewis to the Memphis Sounds, so now it was on George alone to carry the offense. And he wouldn't do much, but have his best season as a pro. His versatility was on full display as he often ran the point due to his great ball handling and passing. George would lead the league with 8 triple-doubles, with his best performance being on February 24th against San Diego, where he dropped 41 points, 25 rebounds, and 13 assists. George had 11 games with double-digit assists. Plus, he was shooting the 3 a lot more and making them at a high level. He was second in the league with 62 makes and 4th with a 35.4% clip. He would also win the MVP this year while securing the scoring title, averaging 30 points, 14 rebounds, 6.5 assists, and 2.5 steals, as the Pacers finished 45 and 39, facing the Spurs in the semifinals again. This series would go to 6 games, but George played out of his mind, averaging 38 and 18, including a 51-point, 17 rebound and 10 assist triple-double in Game 4. This would be the only 50-point triple-double in an ABA or NBA playoff game until Russell Westbrook in 2017. George had another triple-double to close out the Spurs, as Denver stood in the way of yet another finals appearance. This series went 7 games, but the Pacers would win as George averaged 31, 15, and 9, dropping 2 more triple-doubles in the series. Indiana faced Kentucky again in the finals, but George's playoff magic would end here as the Pacers were beaten in 5 games. Despite the loss, this postseason run will go down in history, as George was the first player ever to lead the playoffs in total points, rebounds, and assists, a feat that wouldn't be accomplished again until Nikola Jokic in 2023. Sensing that the ABA was in financial trouble, George decided to exercise his buyout clause. He wanted to play in New York due to his endorsement opportunities, so he sought a restraining order against the league in order to negotiate with all 18 teams in the NBA. On May 30th, 1975, he signed a 6-year, $2.4 million contract with the Knicks, but new league commissioner Larry O'Brien blocked the contract as it challenged the league's constitution. He also ordered the Knicks to forfeit their first selection in the 1976 draft, so George signed a 6-year, $3.2 million, fully guaranteed, no cut, no trade, and no option contract with the Sixers on July 10th. Philly was led by high-scoring guards Doug Collins and Fred Carter. George would quickly show that he didn't have any problems adjusting to the NBA. He would drop 44 20-point games, 10 30-point games, and 5 triple-doubles, with his best performance being on February 8th against Buffalo, with 38 points, 21 rebounds, 10 assists, and 6 steals. In his first NBA season, he averaged 23 points, 12.5 rebounds, 5 assists, and 2.5 steals, making the All-Star team and being named First Team All-NBA. Philly finished 46 and 36, facing the Braves in the first round. George dropped 20 points and and 15 rebounds in his first NBA playoff game, but Bob McAdoo's 36 points and 21 rebounds led Buffalo to the win. George dropped 34 and 11 in a 25-point Game 2 win, as McAdoo shot 6 for 21. McAdoo dropped 34 and 22 in Game 3, as George would have a bad game by his standards, with 15 points and 15 rebounds on 29% shooting as the Sixers lost by 1. In 1976, the Sixers made the biggest acquisition of the summer, as they were able to sign Julius Erving, the best player from the now-defunct ABA, turning Philly into instant contenders. Since he was finally teamed up with a player that was just as good as him, George took his lowest number of shots since his rookie year. He still dropped 40 20-point games and 8 30-point games, averaging 21.5 points, 11.5 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 steals, as George and Julius were both All-Stars and second-team All-NBA members. The Sixers finished 50-32, getting a first-round bye and facing Boston in the semifinals. The series went to 7 games, with Philly coming out on top, but George's numbers were down by a lot, averaging 15 points and 12 rebounds, shooting 38%. His numbers were even worse in the conference finals against Houston, as he averaged 13 and 10 on 35% shooting, but Philly would win in 6 and punch their ticket to the NBA Finals, facing Bill Walton and the Trailblazers. Dr. J and Doug Collins did all they could, as George was still struggling, averaging similar numbers as the last series, but on 38% shooting. Bill Walton dominated, averaging 18 points, 19 rebounds, 5 assists, and 4 blocks, as the Trailblazers won in 6. Philly ran more of a team-based system in 1977, as George's shot attempts went down again. He still had a solid season though, even dropping 32, 22, and 7 in the season opener. He was still able to show off his point forward skills, as he even had a couple games with double-digit assists. He averaged 20 points, 10.5 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 steals, as he failed to make an all-star team for the first time in 5 years. Philly had the best offense in the league this year, finishing 55-27, facing the Knicks in the second round. Their top offense was on full display this series, as they scored 130 points in a 40-point Game 1 blowout, followed by 137 in Game 3 as they easily swept New York. The Washington Bullets were next in the conference finals, as Bob Dandridge played great defense on Irving this series, as George was still pretty ineffective, averaging 13 points and 8 rebounds on 39% shooting, as Washington won in 6 games. In 1978, the Sixers were in need of defense, so they traded George to the Nuggets for Bobby Jones. Denver still had their ABA duo of David Thompson and Dan Issel, but they also had Charlie Scott, even though he was a shell of his former self by now. George started at the 4 and had a comeback season. He dropped 38 20-point games, 9 30-point games, and his then NBA career high of 41 versus the Knicks on January 12th. George made the All-Star team for the last time this year, averaging 23 points, 11.5 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 steals. Denver finished 47-35, facing the Lakers in the first round, but George wouldn't play in this series as he tore his Achilles right before the playoffs, as Denver would lose in 3 games. George was still with the Nuggets to begin 1979, but it was clear that he wasn't the same player anymore after his injury. Through the first 45 games, he was averaging a career-low 15.5 points and 10 rebounds, but he did score his NBA career high of 43 points on January 9th against Houston. On the other side of the league, the Pacers were still struggling in their first 2 years in the NBA, as their attendance numbers were low, so they decided to give up their promising forward Alex English to bring George back. But he was past his prime by this point, with his numbers dropping even more, as his averages between the two teams were 15 points, 9.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and 1.5 steals. The Pacers finished 37-45, making this the first year that George missed the playoffs. George would be reunited with some old teammates in Billy Knight and Don Buse in 1980. Indiana ran a score-by-committee offense as 7 players averaged double figures. His minutes would drop to below 27 a game, but he was still putting up good numbers, dropping 5 straight double-doubles to start the season. George was still showing signs of regression though, as he only dropped 11 20-point games, with his season averages being 13 points, 7.5 rebounds, 3 assists, and 1.5 steals. The Pacers finished 44-38, facing off against his former team in the Sixers. However, he would have a minimal role in this series, only getting about 20 minutes a game, averaging 5 points and 5 rebounds as the Pacers were swept in 2 games. 1981 would be George's last season, as it was pretty clear that his body was failing him. George would primarily come off the bench for the first time in his career, as Tom Owens received starting power forward spot. His minutes went way down to only about 18 a game, as his production would suffer as well, only scoring in double figures 8 times. But the Pacers' offense as a whole was atrocious, as outside Johnny Davis's 17 points a game, the next highest was Billy Knight with 12. They had the league's worst offensive rating and were second to last in scoring, finishing 35-47, missing the playoffs. In his final season, George averaged 5 points, 5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 1.5 steals. On October 27, 1982, George was waived by the Pacers, and he would subsequently retire. After his NBA career, he was pretty much under the radar, other than starting his own company, GM Supply. 35 years after his retirement, he was finally inducted into the 2017 Hall of Fame class. In his final years, however, George's health declined, as in 2023, he struggled with chronic back issues that require multiple surgeries, while his wife of over 40 years passed away from cancer. George would pass away on December 14, 2023 at the age of 73 due to complications from a cardiac arrest. George McGinnis was the prototypical power forward of his era. His strong frame allowed him to bang down low and dominate the glass, while his shooting touch was unique for a big at the time. He could also put the ball on the floor and run the offense, while playing solid interior and perimeter defense. He was one of the few players to dominate both the ABA and the NBA, but for some reason, his name barely comes up when people mention the greats of the 70s. Maybe with the advent of modern medicine, he would have come back from his Achilles tear and still been a dominant player, but George was still a force in both the premier leagues in America for the better part of a decade. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys for listening. We finally hit over 1,000, man. I appreciate all you guys, man. 1,000 subs in 3 months is nuts. I really appreciate all you guys for all the support you guys been giving this channel. But thank you for watching. I really appreciate you guys. If you like this video, please leave a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new. Thank you so much for all the support. I really appreciate you guys. But have a great day. Stay on the grind. I'm out. Peace.